Well, hey guys, when big things happen, we like to take some time, collect our thoughts, and then share them with you guys. And unless you have somehow avoided all forms of social media over the past couple of weeks, you know about what has been happening with the Supreme Court situation. This past Thursday, both Dr. Ford and Mr. Kavanaugh gave testimonies on what they believed happened that night a few decades ago. And as expected, this set off a firestorm of opinions from both sides of the conversation. And also, as expected, both sides were really adamant about their stance. And you probably felt that way a little bit yourself as well. But I don't want to talk about this from a political perspective and whether or not he should or should not be confirmed in this appointment. The reality is you've already made your mind up and decided one way or the other on where you stand on that. And only two people really know the truth. So I just think, what are some options that we can have to focus on in the midst of something like that, no matter what side we fall on the topic? And I'm not even talking about this, honestly, from a just really angry kind of standpoint. As I watched the hearings and saw the drama unfold, and then began to peruse social media to see what people were saying, I really wasn't angry per se. I was just really sad, and here's why. First, it truly saddens me to see how massive the sexual abuse problem is in our country. It should never be belittled, swept under the carpet, or because of what it might do to someone's reputation, or somehow in any way, shape, or form be put back on the victim. Think about this. Can we just take a minute and pause and take in what has actually happened? A woman has claimed she was sexually assaulted, and then the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people is, she's lying. Do you know how often that has happened, and that is actually why women don't say anything ever? Currently in our country, 1 in 3 women have been sexually abused, and for men it's 1 in 6, but 1 in 3 women have been sexually abused. Take that in for just a second. 1 in 3 women. So do this little exercise. Name 3 women you know right now. What if one of them came up to you and says that they have been abused? Is your response, oh, you know what, boys will be boys, or hey, you probably asked for it, or who could really know what was going on then, or this one, or that was so long ago, you should be over it by now? I certainly hope that wouldn't be your response to whoever those 3 women you were kind of picturing in your head. It's also just as sad, honestly, how thoughtless we are towards the different layers and components of all of this. We treat our sexuality as if it's no big deal. But if we could just open our eyes for a second and see the destruction that has happened around simply because we just basically get ho-hum about sexual ethics. We celebrate a distorted and destructive view of sex in our music, in our movies, in our language. We ignore the effects of pornography. And we'll even do things like this. Hey, it's try and give wisdom to people on kind of rules to live by when sleeping around. It's truly bizarre that we don't take a step back for a second and see that this kind of mindset is actually laying the groundwork for the very behaviors that we see on display before us. One of the other things too, I think, that as a result is that the hypocrisy is just so thick on both sides of this conversation, and it's truly frightening because we've become numb to all of the components that has caused so much of this. You might see things like folks chanting about for protesting women's rights, which is great, or the Me Too movements and all of that, but yet in the same breath maybe brush off anything to do with the porn epidemic that we have that contributes to abuse and sex trafficking, to the dehumanization of men and women, and then honestly numbs our brains to the beauty of sex. Or maybe something like this, where we scream about the way people like Donald Trump and Bill Clinton have treated women, yet support actors and musicians who've done the same thing. our hypocrisy and honestly even our ignorance to our brokenness and refusal to dig deeper into what the issues really are really what fosters fertile ground for more of these actions that we just see before us. I think one of the other things that really saddens me about all of this too is just how much we don't care about people. We say we do, but it just doesn't reveal itself when things like this happen. You might be saying, well, yeah, but we're really concerned about the truth. Or what if it's a false accusation? Well, honestly, that's for investigators and courts to decide in a scenario like this. But what is for us to decide is, how are we going to really love people in the midst of this? Especially those that are hurting. That is literally woven into the entire landscape of the Bible, and it was modeled in a very familiar story, actually, in John chapter 8, when Jesus comes on the scene. And what did he do with the woman who was accused of adultery, as the men, or quite frankly, the men that slept with her, first used her as a pawn and then tried to get off completely free? You know what he did? He protected her. He loved her. He tried to build her up. He didn't look at her and say, well, we'll see what happens here. He did something very different. He loved her. None of us know the truth as to what happened in this scenario with these two and this whole Supreme Court thing, but that still should not be our focus. Our focus is supposed to love people like Jesus would have. Yeah, but he said this, and then she said that. And it's not about what they're saying. It's about what we are saying, which leads me to another thing that's honestly, truly just sad about all this. Is you look around at people's posts and you just listen into conversations on how people describe their emotions toward it, and it's how little we care about the words that are coming out of our mouths. What comes out of our mouth is a direct reflection of what is actually in our hearts. And listen, that is not me saying that. That's actually Jesus talking about it in Matthew 15. If your response is to cut the other side down, then what does that say about what's happening in your heart in those moments? And so you might be like, well, he did it. Well, we don't know that. Well, she's lying. Well, we don't know that either, right? And so we got to pay attention to our response and what's actually the words that are coming out of our mouth. And what we do know, though, is what we are speaking, don't we? Is it thoughtful? Oh, that's a good question, right? Is it respectful? Is it gracious? Is it kind? Does your language, how about this? Does your language show that love is your greatest concern? See, what we do know is that both families in this situation are getting ripped apart. What we do know is both families are getting death threats in the midst of this. What we do know is that both people are suffering through the words that are spoken from others, through the actions that they are experiencing. Can you imagine the weight that is happening on both of these families right now? So, here's a good question for us, I think, to ask ourselves. Are we a part of the problem, or are we part of the solution? Do our words reveal our love of Jesus and people? Or are our words revealing more of a love of power and maybe the political party we associate with, or the people that we kind of congregate with on our own personal lives? Ultimately, what does this reveal? And you might be thinking, well, that there's a political problem that is hurting people in our country. Well, sure. And that is a thing, of course, and obviously both sides of the aisle contribute to all of that. But I think what it really reveals is that we have a collective heart issue. And all of us, and I mean all of us, me included, reflecting on all of this, need a deep dive into our souls to truly see what part we are playing in it. And you might be thinking, well, I'm not playing any part in this thing at all. I'm just an innocent bystander and all that's going on. And I would just say, well, hold on, maybe not so fast. You see, I think what we see before us is the direct result of selfishness, of greed, of pride, of confirmation bias, of power, and control. And so, do you have any issues with those in your life at all? Even just 1%, even just a tiny bit. Do you have any issues with any of those things at all? If your answer is no, not me, then I would just like to say thank you to Jesus for watching this video here today. But I know that's not true. We all struggle with some component of those things that I mentioned. But however, if you are like me and realize that there are things that you really do need to confess of, you really do need to repent of, things that you really have to get a new perspective with, then that means that there's some hope, that it doesn't have to just be total darkness around us, that there is some light at the end of the tunnel here. You see, yes, everything that we are seeing right now is sad, and truly on every level, but I also believe that there is an answer for true change if we really want to engage it. While writing this, I just kept thinking about Jesus speaking to his disciples, and he said a lot of different things, but I remember when he said this in Matthew 5, he said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." And then I remember in David writing in Psalm 51, he said, "Create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me." And then even Paul, when he was talking to the Philippians, he said, whatever we focus on, are we focused on what is pure and honorable? And are we putting those things into practice? And that, here's the beauty of what he wrote. He said, when we put those things into practice, then we will experience a peace that can come from God. So Christian, if you're listening to this, you have a responsibility to carry this out. It's not a suggestion. It's not an option. It's not we'll see how this all plays out. You have a responsibility by the very terminology calling yourself a Christian. And so we can live in negativity. We can live in hypocrisy. We can live in thoughtlessness, or actually consider a whole other option that is readily available to all of us if we choose to do so. If it doesn't, it does not have to go down like this. And so let me leave you with this. When Jesus taught about freedom, when he taught about generosity, when he taught about love, and then grace, and then hope, and then forgiveness, it wasn't to sell some kind of book. It was so our souls, the very depth of our being, could experience true life, and then get this, then treat others the same way. But you know what that does? It requires a healthy perspective on what we see. And as I said yesterday in our services, that the health of our perspective is determined by the quality of our curiosity. So, are you curious to seek out real answers? Are you curious to kind of take in the whole story? Are you curious to see what God might truly have for you? Or are you just going to keep on doing the same old thing and getting the same result? There's something far greater for all of us if we choose to engage it that way. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you soon.